Hello and welcome to the Research in Psychology talk. Today I'm going to be talking to you. My name's Richard Wilkie. I'm the Director of Research here in Psychology at the University of Leeds. So a very big welcome to you. Unfortunately, I can't see all your happy faces. Normally I'd be talking to you live, but here you have a pre-recorded lecture recorded just a week or so before you've joined us. So this is research as it's happening at the moment in 2021. I've been working very hard the last year on putting together an environment statement which captures all the fantastic research that takes place in the School of Psychology. And this is part of the research exercise framework, which is currently being assessed and hopefully will be scored very highly, because from what I can see, there's amazing research taking place in the school. So I'm going to talk to you now a bit about the research that's happening, to give you an overview of the sorts of research we do. And then I'm going to pass you across to some of my research leads who work in the department and support me in my job. And they'll talk about some specific aspects of the job of research that we pursue. So when we think about research in psychology, psychology is a very broad field, and the important thing in intensive universities is that we're using our extensive knowledge and expertise and interests, all these the research expertise we have, to enrich your education. So for us, research and teaching goes hand in hand, and we value both equally. So we're busy discovering findings in our laboratory, and we're very excited about telling you, our undergraduates, about those findings. And ideally, you're working with us in those labs to help discover these things. So I'm sure you'll come across research at a number of points in your degree. The clearest point is in your final year project, where you tend to work with a research expert on their particular area of expertise. And the research that we carry out in Leeds really is about improving psychological health and well-being through our research and innovation. So coming up with ways to help people improve their lives. And the way that we do that is through targeting 4 grand challenges. So these grand challenges cover the nervous system and its disorders. So the brain, the mind, how the nerves work, how they pass signals, how they allow us to perform behaviors that are important for our everyday lives. We also think about the development of the human, so the lifespan development from the child learning to walk, to write, all the educational development that takes place through, of course, your teenage years, to at university, your development to older age. So I'll talk a bit more about all those aspects of lifespan in a moment. We look at health and well-being in its broadest sense as well, and then probably the widest form of challenge we look at is behavior change, actually changing the way that humans interact with each other and their environments in order to be more successful, happy, and healthy. So you can see there's a natural overlap between these grand challenges, and that's why in the diagram here they're embedded one within the other, that the nervous system is really within an individual, and then you build from that through to interactions between individuals and society as a whole, the social and environmental systems. So you can see there's this embedded flow from that very fine grain through to the interaction across our environment. So I'll talk about these in turn, just to give you a good idea of the sorts of research that's taking place in the School of Psychology. So when considering nervous system and its disorders, often we're thinking about some of the techniques you use. So scanning techniques such as EEG or fMRI, to understand which parts of the brain are functioning, how they're functioning, what they're responsible for doing in terms of their function. There are various stimulation methods, brain stimulation methods. So TMS and TDCS are both ways of of conducting a magnetic or an electrical signal to alter the way that neurons fire, and as a result you can understand better how those brain areas support function. And then we apply those to particular areas, particular patient populations that might have difficulty. So you can think of someone who's had a stroke, a lesion to part of their brain that's been affected. How are they able to perform a task? Can they perform a task? How can we best rehabilitate them in performing those tasks? And you can look at a range of different sorts of patient populations that might have different brain areas affected. So you can see that the techniques and the behavior are very tightly linked. You need ways of measuring behavior. So here's a picture from my laboratory in Leeds, the driving simulator that we have in psychology. So I'm very interested in how we perform skillful actions such as driving or writing, and how are those produced by particular brain regions, and what happens if you have damage to the nervous system, and how does that affect your ability to do things like drive. So from looking at the brain areas that function within an individual, you can start to think about, well, those functions came from somewhere, they developed. So you think about a child is learning all the time how to improve the way they perform tasks, from the very young crawling and then walking through to eating, and every task that you carry out, you pretty much had to learn at some point. So we're interested in various aspects of child development, from appetite and nutrition, and how children regulate their appetite, the importance of breakfast in the behavior and learning of primary age children. We're interested in the development of cognition, so developmental disorders as well, and a big aspect of our research is a link that we have with the Born in Bradford scheme. So this is a very large scheme testing 20,000 children as they develop across their lifespan. So that these tests started when they were first born. They've been tested all the way through their primary schools, and the very first kids are now starting to go into secondary school. So this is an amazing resource for helping understand the characteristics of a child's environment that can affect their success or otherwise in education. And we're also interested in the mental health and the mental development of children through to young adults and teenage years. So we're developing and testing mindfulness interventions in UK secondary schools. So we've talked about the lifespan at the very beginning ends, the early development, but of course there's a time course to this, and we will all age, and there are challenges that come with age. Our functions tend to decline, and so we're looking at ways to support older adults, maybe maintain function for longer. So by looking at the neuroanatomy and looking at brain plasticity, seeing what we can do to keep older adults going longer, and looking at their quality of life. What can we do to support older adults in maintaining their quality of life? What's important for an older adult that might be in a hospital or a care home? So that naturally leads us into the third grand challenge, which is health and well-being, where you can see the first point here is looking at lifespan research, promoting vegetable intake from children and older adults. So that there are particular aspects across all these cohorts of malnutrition, of not eating the right foods. So we have particular expertise in the department looking at nutrition in children, and looking at diet interventions and drugs within the obesogenic environment that we seem to have created. So this is a huge problem for many different societies, not just for us in the UK, where essentially people are eating the wrong foods, they're not good for them, and they become overweight. So what can we do to improve health and well-being for society? And Of course, nutrition and behaviour all comes together, involving community engagement, looking at the agri-food industry, and so we have a very strong N8 research partnership. This is a group of very strong research universities in the north of England that are coming together to try and solve these problems in a very holistic fashion. Trying to solve these problems one part at a time tends not to succeed. You have to bring the whole problem together. Why are the foods there available? Are they the right price for the people that want to buy them? Those sorts of aspects. So you can see the health and well-being, some of the challenges there are around the behaviours of individuals, eating the wrong foods, eating too much food. So if we can understand and improve how we can intervene and change human behaviour, that can lead to all sorts of positive outcomes for society. So looking at interventions, be it smoking or diet or physical activity, could lead to massive improvements in society. So there are studies investigating the use of technologies such as apps to try and give feedback to individuals about their behaviour and trying to promote the behaviours that will be healthy. We've got a very strong track record and a strong history in the School of Psychology, developing theories around how best to influence and change behaviour, informing practice and improving health. And the final aspect to flag here is around patient safety, where we work very closely with colleagues in the Bradford Institute of Health Research, examining the best way to promote patient safety. So there's all sorts of aspects of a patient being in a hospital that whereby by understanding how to improve and change behaviour can lead to much better outcomes for those individuals. Making sure that individuals take the right medicines at the right time, for instance, making sure that health practitioners are performing exactly the steps they need to take for the best outcome of those patients. So hopefully you can see there's many broad topics of interest across the school. You can see there's strong themes in human nutrition, there's strong themes in health research, there's strong themes in child development and perception, action and cognition. So in terms of the areas that we're interested in, of course, you can look at the individual staff members and the publication records that they have. You can see that the sorts of research that's going on. What I thought it'd be useful for you all to better understand are the steps that take place in carrying out research. And the slide here, you can see what's involved in research. Actually, carrying out the research is often the bit you will come in contact with. You'll hear about us talking about the projects we've got running at the moment. Maybe what you don't see are all the aspects around it. So before a research project starts, we have to apply to get some funding to support it. So that funding might buy the equipment that we have in the building. The funding might pay for a researcher to work with us and spend all their time on it, but it probably covers some of our time as well. So it covers the costs of us concentrating on that and managing that research project. So in the next series of slides, first of all, Jac Billington, who's my research lead, focusing particularly on research grant income. She's going to talk a bit about how we go about gaining funding, where we get funding from, what that funding is used for. So once we've done our research, of course, it doesn't stop there. We then need people to know about the research that's taken place. So one of the things we do is tell all of you about it. So we include it in our lectures, but we do disseminate more widely. We publish our findings in journal articles, in books, to make sure those publications are freely available to scientists anywhere in the world. And of course, we'll go to conferences and talk to other colleagues about our scientific findings as well. So after Jac talks to you about funding, Ian Kellar, one of my other research leads, is going to explain the sorts of publications that have taken place in the department and give you an overview of the work that we're doing there in terms of the themes and how these publications kind of come together as an overall view. And then really the final step of research is pushing even beyond the dissemination and publication. It's making sure our research actually has real impact in society. So Amanda Waterman is going to talk about this aspect of our work, where we're really trying to change the government guidance. We're trying to change the way companies work, the way industry works, on the basis of the research that we've carried out. And she'll talk through some of the case studies, talk through some good examples of the impact that has taken place as a result of the research we've done in the department over the last 10 years or so. So that's the end of my section of the talk. I hope this has helped you to understand a bit better the purpose of the research that goes on in the department, where our research fits in the bigger picture of the challenges we're trying to address, and hopefully you'll get a sense of how your small component might feed into us solving some of these grand challenges. So thanks for your attention today. I'll pass you on to my research leads, who will follow up with their particular parts of the talk. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Richard. So I'm Dr. Jac Billington. I am one of the research leads, and I oversee grant income in the department. So what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today is how we go about applying for funding, from what sources, and how we go about carrying out research. So funding is essential for research. You might not think about this when you come here as an undergraduate to study, but in order to do all the research that we do, we need to get quite a large amount of funds coming into the university. And these are competitive funds. We put in applications, not 100% guaranteed to get them, but hopefully we do. And they pay for various things that are associated with funding. So we have lots of cool equipment in the departments. When we get a grant, that quite often pays for some equipment to be installed. So we have things like an EEG machine in the department, which tracks electrical activity in the brain. We have FNAS machines, which track blood flow in the brain. Eye trackers, driving simulators, all this stuff costs lots of money, and also lots of money to upkeep once it's installed as well. We do some travelling as part of a grant. So for every grant we do, we're expected to disseminate the research to other people. So that might be other experts in the field, but it also might be to the public, other people in the private sector. And even in the last few years, when we don't necessarily have to travel, we still have to pay for conference registration fees. We also may have to travel to meet up with collaborators, so both in the UK and also overseas. One of the main costs on a grant is employees. So when anyone puts in a grant, they're known as the PI or principal investigator, and some of their time will be costed in so that they have enough time in their workload to work on the grant. But we also have employees on grants as well. So usually there's a full-time postdoctoral or research assistant working on the grant, and the kind of daily interaction with the grant, testing participants, writing up papers, all this sort of thing. Of course, we are psychologists, so we test participants, and we normally don't ask people to do things for free. Sometimes we do, but generally we offer people money and incentives to come along, because it usually makes for a better participant if they feel rewarded for taking part in research. And then last but not least is infrastructure. So this is all the stuff that you don't really think about. And it's things like paying for lighting in the building, heating, floor space in a lab you might be using. All those sorts of things have to be costed into a grant as well. And what is the purpose of funding? So obviously it's to pay for the grant to run, but there's lots of different types of grants that kind of have a different purpose. So smaller grants, which can range from a few hundred to a few £1,000s, tend to be called starter grants, and they're usually for piloting ideas. So some grants are up to several £1,000,000, but no one, unfortunately, is going to give you several £1,000,000 if you've not had a grant before. So generally, you kind of start small and work your way up. And that might be because you're an early career researcher, so you apply for smaller grants so you can kind of prove that you can run a grant. But also, if you're kind of developing a new idea that hasn't really been tested before, they're pilot grants. And there's also specific grants for industry. So universities are increasingly working with industrial partners. So for instance, I work in transport studies a lot. So I do a lot of work to do with how people make decisions in road traffic scenarios, and may have to work with companies like Volvo Technology, people like that. And they benefit from our research expertise, and we benefit from, say, their expertise in developing a particular software or hardware. And there's usually specific grants to help those collaborations. And then there's kind of medium to large grants, which can be kind of maybe £500,000 up to £2-3 million. And these are usually grants that are paying for ideas that have been well kind of researched already, but need much more developing and need a lot more effort put into them. So they're proven concept ideas, but need a lot more work put into them. And these tend to be multidisciplinary. So all that means is we work across departments. So psychologists might be working with people in transport studies, or people in biology, or people in medicine. And they often tend to be multi-site as well. So at Leeds, we work a lot with people in other institutions in the UK, but also work a lot across the world as well. And the idea is these big grants really are focused on getting the best minds together to do the best research for better outcomes for society. And in terms of sources of funding, well, there are lots of sources of funding, and where you go tends to depend on what your question is or kind of what size grant it is. One of the main sources of funding is the government. So the government funds research via different kind of research councils. So one of these councils is called UKRI, and this used to be split into several different councils that tended to focus on different types of research, but it's all been put together under one umbrella term at the moment. And we have a few kind of UKRI research grants in the department. This is only just naming a couple, but for instance, we've got one that was funded by what was called the Medical Research Council before it was UKRI, and this is looking at smoking prevention in younger people. So how do we prevent younger people from starting smoking? And this links back to some of the things Richard was talking about in terms of behaviour change. So how do we change people's behaviour for the better of society and for the individual as well? We also have grants on from the EPSRC, which is the Engineering and Physics Research Council. This particular grant is one of my grants. So computational models of local traffic interactions for testing automated vehicles. So all that means is what we're looking at is how people interact in traffic. So this is real people in cars, how they adjust to people giving signals, all these sorts of things. And the idea is if we can model human behaviour, we can inform how to better to design automated or kind of driverless vehicles that are increasingly heard about. So a very, very current topic that we're researching there. And then these two other councils on here are NIHR, so National Institute for Health Research, and the Bradford Institute for Health Research. And as is suggested in the name, they're very much focused on health aspects of psychology in our case. And they're also government funded, but very much tagged to the NHS. So one of the examples for NIHR is looking at mindfulness in schools. So how can we encourage school-age children to engage in mindfulness, obviously for improving their mental health in the long run. And then we also have a Born in Bradford scheme, which is funded by BIHR. And all Born in Bradford stands for is this huge cohort study we have that's taken children in Bradford from a very young age and followed them up year on year to see how their development trends. And this is because Bradford is known for being quite a deprived area, and it's aimed at kind of how we can improve the well-being and living and educational outcomes of children in Bradford. Charity sources, we get a lot of money from charity. Some of the charities you may have heard of, so Cancer UK, charities like that, fund research, not just the biological elements of, say, curing cancer, but also the socio-emotional elements of how can we help people deal with cancer. In the examples here, the Yorkshire Cancer Research funded research on how we can increase bowel cancer screening in vulnerable populations in Leeds. These are people who may not want to go for bowel cancer screening, but should do. So again, linking back to behavioural change. The Wellcome Trust has funded research on postural support for motor performance in older adults. So we know that older adults quite often decline in their motor abilities, and it's looking at how we can improve that. The Leverhulme Trust have funded a project on camouflage and human processes of detection. And again, that's one of my grants. So as I said, I'm interested in traffic. I'm also interested in why people make mistakes when they're in road traffic scenarios, and using models of camouflage to see if we can improve how visible things like cyclists are in road traffic scenes. And then the Waterloo Foundation funding kind of, if we can use kind of physical activity and learning in classes to improve the learning outcomes of children with attention difficulties. So all very applied research here. And then finally, industry. So we do lots of work with industry. I've not mentioned any specific industries here because sometimes it can be a bit sensitive if we're working with them in terms of naming them. But industry is often interested in using academics to do research to kind of determine how well their product is functioning. So some examples of things we're doing in the department is looking at satiety effects of high protein snack foods, how full do people feel when they've eaten them. Training new associations for food products, so how can we kind of change what people associate with particular foods and their perceptions of them, in the hope we might be able to increase kind of healthy food choices. Physiological and cognitive impacts of fragrance, so companies that design things like shower gels and shampoos, and looking at how they can improve that so that people might be more likely to buy their product or feel better when they're using their product. And then also looking at the validity of assessing food addiction. So how do we go about investigating food addiction with people who have addictions to quite often unhealthy foods, again, for the hope of long-term change in terms of people's food choices and food habits. And then just to look at funding directly within the schools. So I've been charged with doing a little review of what amounts of money we're bringing into the department over a number of years. And this kind of incorporates kind of the last 6 years of our assessment period. And what I've done here is just outline what our top 6 funders are, and that counts for 50% of all our income in the department. So we probably get funding from about 30 to 40 bodies in total, but this is the top 50% of income. And you can see that 1.4 million of that is from the EU, which I didn't actually mention in those previous slides. But we do get a lot of research funding from the European Union to do particular projects, and these tend to be very large kind of grants in the millions of pounds that we get from them. And then we've got MRC, EPSRC and BBSRC, and these are all part of that UKRI that I just mentioned. So government funding that's coming in to the department for research projects that are very much targeted towards things like health or road traffic scenarios, or understanding neurological underpinnings of psychological behaviours. And then again, Bradford Institute for Health Research and the National Institute for Health Research are on here. So we get a lot of funding regularly from these bodies to look at things like the Born in Bradford cohort, and also looking at how patients and clinical behaviour and improving health outcomes of people in society. And then finally, I just want to say get involved. So I've mentioned funding sources. One funding source I didn't mention is internships, and these tend to be quite small pots of money. But I've applied for these in the past from the Wellcome Trust to fund paying someone to work with me over summer, a full living wage over the summer. And these people have got research experience of working on a grant, lots of different grants and areas depending on your area of interest. So do look into that as you're kind of here at Leeds over the few 3 years you're here. And also third year projects can be associated with the grants. So this year my students were collecting some data related to my grant on camouflage and kind of target detection in road traffic scenarios. And that data they have collected will be part of my grant write-up and part of a publication, hopefully, eventually. So you can get involved yourself. It's a great experience for you. It's a good CV builder. And also you sometimes gain skills by getting involved in these projects outside of your degree. There are skills that go above and beyond your degree. So again, really great experience going forward. I'm going to pass you on to Ian now. He's going to talk to you a little bit about how we disseminate this research and write publications.
Thanks, Jac. Hi, my name's Ian Kellar. I'm Associate Professor of Health Psychology in the School of Psychology. I'm interested in why people don't do what they say they want to do, and I look at that in the context of randomized control trials of behavioural interventions. I teach third year major project, and if you do your major project with me, we'll be developing a simple behavioural intervention and evaluating it. And I also teach something called systematic review, which is a method of evaluating whole areas of evidence. And I teach that to our MSc students on the 2 MSc programs we run within the school. So you've heard Jac talk about funding, and I'm going to talk you through the process of getting from funding to publications. And I'm going to do that by giving an example of a project that I worked on from 2015 through till 2020. I'm also going to just talk to you very briefly about an analysis I did of the different areas within the school that our researchers work. So here's an example of getting from funding to publication that I'm illustrating through a project that I worked on in Bangladesh over the last few years. In 2015-2016, we started putting together a grant application for £750,000 to the Medical Research Council to adapt an intervention that had already been tested in UK mosques. And it was an intervention to reduce the harm of secondhand smoke by encouraging people to have smoke-free homes. And as part of the evaluation of that intervention, my colleagues found that people found explicitly health-promoting messages in mosques unacceptable. So we wanted money to see if we could adapt Islamic scripture and sermons in mosques called khutbah as a means of showing the Islamic basis for smoke-free homes. So we got the money in 2016, and then we had to write ethic applications to ethics panels in the UK and in Bangladesh, so we could plan our measurement and data collection and trial processes in advance, so we could avoid bias that would threaten the validity of our findings. We also had to plan data governance strategies so that patients' data could be safeguarded, and we had to plan a statistical analysis strategy with York Trials Unit to avoid statistical errors that would threaten the validity of our research. So once we'd got that in place, we spent 2017-2018 trying to recruit mosques and households to the study. And that took screening 4,430 households to find 1,800 eligible households and 118 mosques to find 45 eligible mosques. So the households needed to have at least one smoker and at least one non-smoker and attend one of the mosques in our study. They also had to not be moving house over the next year. And then the mosques had to have a non-smoking imam and also conduct Friday prayers where they had a sermon. So whilst we're doing that, in the background, we're also writing up the protocol for publication before we conducted the trial. And that was submitted in 2018, and it was accepted in December 2018 and finally published properly in 2019. And this is the intervention that we developed. So during my time in Dhaka, I met with imams, and we took to them a list of Islamic scriptures that we thought were suitable. And we developed these with Muslim colleagues and using an Arabic Quranic search tool. And then we worked with those scholars to identify best scriptures. We worked with them to develop sermons. We then tested those briefly with a series of mosque congregation members. They adapted it to make it more acceptable and improve their understanding of it. We then took it back to some more imams. They selected different scriptures that they thought would better fit the particular messages that we got. We then took it to imams who would actually give the prayer and check that they understood it. 12 sermons over 12 weeks. This particular sermon was about understanding that if you had kind of gone down the wrong path, you could be forgiven and come back on the right path, so that if people relapsed, they wouldn't stay relapsed, that they would come back to not smoking in the home. So the mosques themselves that the imams were delivering this intervention through were all based around Dakar. And it was the other thing that was important that I forgot to mention was that they couldn't be using biomass or coal to heat their houses. This is good because the main measure of the success of our intervention was a measure of air quality. And we took the measure of air quality before the sermons started, so before any of the imams had started giving these khutbah. And then we went back at 3 months and 6 months and took measures of their behaviour and the psychological determinants of the behaviour. And then finally, we went back at 12 months and took another air quality measure. And as you can imagine, it's really hard to keep 1,800 households in a study. And most of 2018 and 2019 was spent following up those households to make sure that they stayed in the study. And finally, from all that work, really from 2017 to 2020, we got one real major publication in Lancet Global Health in 2021. And I'm about to submit another paper to Pilot and Feasibility Studies, which covers the intervention development. And a colleague and friend of the department, Kath Jackson, is about to submit another article on the processes by which people manage their response to those sermons. So I've illustrated how we get from funding to publication. I'm just going to now very briefly describe some of the areas in which we publish within the School of Psychology. So this is called a cluster term co-occurrence map with a density overlay, which is a complicated way of saying it's like a word cloud. And it's what you get if you extract the words from the summaries at the beginning of publications. And this is from all the publications produced by the School of Psychology from 2016 to 2020. And as you can see, in the middle of this map is the word child. And that's because although not all of us work with children, enough of us work with children in enough areas that it becomes the central term for our outputs for the last 5 years. So the first cluster, the central term in this cluster is patient, and that's care, quality and feedback. And this cluster is the result of our publications in the area of experiences in healthcare and in the qualitative methods that we use to explore those experiences and in other psychological processes. So this is kind of healthcare experience and qualitative methods. The next cluster is centered around task and performance and items and experiments. So this is the methods that are used to explore task performance experimentally, primarily amongst children, because we do lots of work with the Born in Bradford cohort, which I'm sure you'll hear more about over the next few weeks, but also just generally where we do experiments with participants. This cluster is around behaviour, intention, attitude and predictors, and this is the result of work done within the school to understand behaviour and behaviour change, and also to produce behaviour change by targeting those determinants of behaviour. And lastly, this cluster is around food, appetite, obesity and energy intake. And this cluster is the result of publications on work on food composition, food preference, and how energy intake can affect obesity. So I hope that's been an interesting but brief overview of how researchers in the school might get from funding to publication, and it might have hopefully given you an idea of the areas that we publish papers in the school. Now I think I'm going to pass to Amanda Waterman, who's now going to look at how we get from publication to impact.
Hello everybody, I'm Amanda Waterman and I'm the research lead for Impact, as Richard outlined at the beginning of this talk. And so I am obviously going to be talking to you about impact of our research. And when we talk about impact, we mean something slightly different from us sharing our findings with other academics. So generally when we talk about impact, it's about sharing our research and using our research to help improve things in the real world, in the wider community, whether that's through the NHS, for example, or through schools, or through local businesses, or a whole myriad of different ways that we can reach out to practitioners and policymakers to share our research and to share what we found and what that means, or what we're suggesting would be a good thing to do to improve certain outcomes, such as healthy eating, or improved educational attainment, or improved safety on our roads. So I'm going to take you through a few examples of research projects in our department that have that impact in the wider community, out in the real world, if you like. They're not the only projects that we have in the department that are doing that, but I just pulled out some of the bigger projects that we currently have. So one of those is around patient safety, and there's a group of researchers who are looking at how to improve particular routines and procedures that happen in hospitals, and working alongside partners within the NHS to improve the uptake and the effective way of implementing those procedures. And these can be quite simple procedures that are done fairly routinely, but might not always be followed as well as they could, and that sometimes then lead to problems for the patients further down the road. So researchers in the department have been working alongside the NHS to educate NHS staff on how to implement those procedures in a more effective way, and to monitor those procedures in a more effective way. And this research has meant some very concrete outcomes. So it has saved, we can show that that research has saved millions of pounds for certain NHS trusts that we've been working with, and that it has improved NHS staff knowledge and awareness around these particular procedures and how to implement them, and how to implement them safely. So you can see that this research is having real world impact. It's improving patient safety, it's saving the NHS money, and it's improving staff awareness of certain important issues around these routine procedures. Another research project that happens in our school is around the importance of breakfast for performance at school. So this is a group of researchers that have looked at evidence showing how simply just having a breakfast before you go to school improves cognitive performance, and therefore obviously is likely to improve children's engagement with and attendance and attainment at school. And this is again another research project that's been going on for many years, and this research was one of the key reasons that contributed to the government, the DFE, the Department for Education, renewing their government-funded breakfast clubs. And because of the contacts that this research project has with local schools and various other networks, that an additional 1,000 or nearly 1,000 breakfast clubs have been set up in certain schools as a direct result of this research that we're doing in the department. So again, you can see this having real tangible benefits for children. There are literally thousands of children out there who are receiving breakfast because of the kind of research that we're doing in this department, and which is helping them in their day-to-day school lives. Another big research project that we're very involved in this department is the Born in Bradford study. This is a longitudinal cohort study that's following the lives of over 13,500 children and their families, and one of the main focuses of this study is trying to support disadvantaged children, whether that's disadvantaged through living in deprivation or poverty, or disadvantaged because of learning difficulties, or various other ways that the children can be disadvantaged. We're conducting research to try and help support them, and I've just pulled out a couple of examples from Born in Bradford. One is a project called Glasses in Classes, which is where we found that a lot of children, particularly in deprived areas, clearly had problems with their eyesight, but were not being taken for routine eye tests to the opticians. So we brought the opticians to the schools, the children had their eyes tested in the school setting, identified the children that needed glasses, and then enabled them to get those glasses more easily, because again, you tend to have low uptake among certain areas of children actually getting the glasses that they need. It's a really simple thing, but obviously if you have a child in a class that can't read the board properly, They're not saying anything, so they might feel a little bit uncomfortable, or they might not even realise that that's not normal. Often you just think the board is blurry and you don't realise other people can't see it. So this is a very simple way that we've been able to bring together different areas of research, if you like. So there's sort of optometry and the opticians with the education sector, and it's something that the Born in Bradford study really likes to do, is to bring people together across that divide to provide these glasses to children to improve their school experience and therefore hopefully their school attainment. And as I've been talking about, it's really one of the things that Born in Bradford wants to do is to bring together, say, researchers and practitioners in health and issues around that, including things to do with children accessing things like mental health services, or children with learning difficulties who are accessing specialist support, and education and schools, because often these things, obviously there is overlap, but there's maybe not as much overlap as you think. So one of the things that we did, particularly during COVID-19, where it really came to a head, was trying to bring together senior leaders and practitioners within the health sector and senior leaders and practitioners within education to support disadvantaged children, and to bring those the expertise that they had together within workshops and seminars, so that they could then talk to each other about some of the problems they were experiencing, say for example in accessing specialist services such as speech and language therapy, the schools struggling to access speech and language therapy or counselling, or schools not quite getting the right information about what to do around the pandemic and the health issues, and the schools then wanting to educate the parents and the community that they are sitting in, but not always having the information they wanted to have, so being able to talk to the health practitioners about that. And we also produced a report that was fed back to the Department for Education on some of those early impacts on learning and well-being for disadvantaged children during the COVID-19 pandemic through our contacts within Born in Bradford. So those are three fairly large research projects that have all been going on for some years. So generally to build up enough evidence to have impact and to have the confidence to reach out to a community or a setting and say that we think you should do X or Y, and the evidence shows that you should do X or Y. Obviously you want to have a strong evidence base. So these projects generally have been going on for many, many years. And as I said, there are a wealth of other projects, some that have also been going on for a long time, some that are more in their earlier stages and have yet to have perhaps some of the longer term impact that some of our other research projects have. So again, I've just listed a few here so you can see the wealth of research and the breadth of research that we have in the department in terms of making that real world impact. So we have a lot of work in HARU, which is our Health and Appetite Research Unit, looking at healthy eating in children, infants and children, particularly around increasing liking of vegetables and the amount of vegetables that children eat in infancy. We also have a large research project that's linked to the Institute for Transport Studies in the university. We're looking at driving, particularly around perception and action, how we see the road and the cues that we use to drive and steer safely. And that some of those findings are feeding back into the transport industry, particularly Transport for London, around these issues to do with improving road safety, particularly with lorry drivers. Again in HARU, we have other staff looking at how the armed forces could monitor the food intake of their personnel. So it's very important, obviously, particularly when the armed forces are out on operations, that they eat well and they eat in a way that is going to sustain them. But they often find that they may not always eat as well as they should do, and that perhaps they're skipping some meals or they're not getting the right nutrients that they need. So researchers in our department have developed a tool which has been used for many years now, really effective and efficient tool to get information on what the soldiers or other armed force personnel are eating, so that can then help to improve that situation moving forward. We have researchers that are looking at various issues to do with supporting adolescents and young people. One of those is a big piece of work that's being done around helping to reduce smoking uptake and continuation of smoking in adolescents and young people, particularly working within secondary schools, not primary schools. Within secondary schools, using behaviour change interventions to try and encourage reduction of smoking in adolescents. And then we have another group of staff who are experts on supporting mental health in young people, teenagers and adolescents and young people, using things like mindfulness techniques as one example and school-based interventions, but also taking this internationally as well now, and working with partners across in India to support mental health of young people across in India as well. So it's really just to give you a flavour for the fact that there are a lot of there's a lot of research going on in our department where we're seeking not only to just publish our research in papers other academics will read, but we are very much wanting to work alongside and with practitioners and people out in the community so that our research can actually have real world impact. And as you go through level 1 and certainly into level 2 and level 3, you will start to hear a bit more about this research, because those of us that are involved in this impactful research will definitely be using it as examples in our lectures that we give to you. So I hope that gives you a flavour for some of the things that we're doing around impact in the department. So just to finish on, just to encourage you to find out a bit more about the staff that are going to be teaching you and the research that's going on in the department. So there's links on these slides that you can access, or you can just Google Psychology, University of Leeds, and you will get our web pages and just have a little look around at the different research projects. You can click on different staff and find out what they're doing and links to the different projects there. So for example, here you can look up individual members of staff. So if you wanted to find out what Richard is doing, and Richard is leading the work I've just mentioned on transport and improving road safety, you can go and click on his link and you can read about the research that he's doing. You also will have the opportunity to take part in experiments that are happening in the department. So there's something called the participant pool, and there will be information being given to you about that separately. But it enables you to sign up as a participant in a whole bunch of different types of studies that are being offered. Some of these will be run directly by staff. Some of them will be final year project students who are collecting their data for their final year dissertations, and we expect our level 1 and level 2 students to help out with that, so that when you're a final year level 3 student, you can then use our level 1 and level 2 students to help you collect your data for your own research project. So please go and have a look at the website and have a look at all the research that we do. And finally, just say that we are all really looking forward to meeting you all. Hopefully this year will be a little bit better than last year, and we'll be able to see you face to face for quite a lot of the teaching, and we really hope you enjoy your time at Leeds. Bye.